Hey guys, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto created the Forbidden Harem clan and every girl wanted to join? If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comment. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. So let us start the story.
No, please, no, it hurts, it hurts. Screams filled the small room as many people loomed over a small child tied to an operating table. No, you cannot place me into that filthy child. You scum. On the operating table, a small girl with the most beautiful long golden hair had her chest cut open right in the middle of her rib cage, and a black cloud loomed over it. All the people around the table wore protective gear and masks, holding a rod cackling with a green mist, pushing the cloud into the open wound on the girl's chest. The girl screamed in agony as the cloud was finally pushed into her, and the men and women surrounding her quickly sewed the wound shut with an unnoticeable seal within it. The girl had fallen asleep due to the pain, and her beautiful hair scorched to a dead navy blue color, dry like straw. Aika Kasumi gasped awake, tears in her eyes. She looked around to find herself in her bed, in her bedroom at her house in the Leaf. She put a hand to her racing heart, trying to calm down. Her body shook more than a cat who just recently took a bath, and her red eyes were wide. She blinked and walked towards a mirror. She saw her disgusting hair, or so she thought, and ran a hand through it. She winced as it scraped her fingers and pulled at her scalp. She sighed and let her hand fall to her side. Why can't I be normal? Why can't I have beautiful hair like all the other girls? Why can't I worry about how I look and care about what people thought? She thought as a tear rolled down her cheek. She had always wanted to be like all the other girls, wishing that she never had the creature inside of her. She was bullied relentlessly because of her hair and her creepy red eyes, so she had been taught to be a ninja privately. Barely anybody knew what lay inside of her except the Hokage, the elders and a few elite Jonin and Anbu. What lay inside of her, you ask? It was one of the few remaining mystic legends. They were mythical creatures corrupted by darkness. Unlike tailed beasts, they do not rely on chakra nor hosts, the Jinchuriki. But if a mystic legend gets trapped inside a human, if the human dies, so does the legend. This method has been used many times to get rid of them. Mystic legends have pure power coming from a darkness that dwells within every soul, and by consuming the more souls makes the legend stronger. It is like a competition. He who eats more souls are strongest. They live in their own element or realm, and consume the souls within that realm. Most of them were killed off, but not without a fight. The weakest would extinguish half a nation before being taken down. The few that remained killed secretly, and were the strongest of the whole 9. In total, only 3 remained. The ghoul, the werewolf and the siren. Aika had the siren inside of her. Many thought that all were extinct, but that was the work of the village leaders hoping not to have panic running through their villages. The siren was known as the death siren, known to lure children to the shore with her soft melody and drag them under the water, drowning them, before devouring their souls. Parents had to sleep in the same room as their children and lock all ways of escape. Some even tied their children down to the bed in fear of the siren calling them. Aika walked into the bathroom, splashing water on her face before she noticed how dark it was outside. She looked at the clock and saw that it was 4 in the morning. Sighing, she got dressed and walked out her front door. She usually trained whenever she woke up from nightmares, which was nearly every day. She went training to get things off her mind and to relieve stress. The worst part was that she couldn't tell anyone about the nightmares, or hope to be comforted. Not even Naruto, who was now a close friend of hers, and had dealt with nearly the same pain. She sighed and gazed up at the sky, the moon still standing tall well into the darkness, illuminating the dark and cold night. She wished that someone or something could illuminate the depths of her corrupted and trashed soul, purifying her and making her feel normal. But she knew that would never happen, seeing as Danzo strictly forbade her from romance, and even if she tried, he'd find a way to make sure that they were separated. She sighed and began sprinting. She ran freely throughout the roads of the Hidden Leaf, feeling tears come to her eyes as she thought of everything that happened to her. She wasn't exiled from the village like Naruto was, but she lived with the knowledge of having a child-eating creature full of malice within her. She bumped into someone, and she looked up in shock as she stumbled back a little bit. Naruto stood there with a shocked expression on his face, before it turned into a grin. "Hey, Aika, what are you doing up so early? He asked, and she recovered from her shock and retorted, I should be asking you that question. You're a really lazy guy if what I've heard is true. She shot and he groaned. I have a mission. Kakashi wanted me up early because it's a long way there and he absolutely wants to be there by nightfall. And if I didn't, Sakura would probably beat me up. Again, an amused smile formed on her lips. You should obey your teacher's orders just because he's your teacher. Not because a girl threatens to beat you up. She snickered and he glared. I don't listen to teachers. They're all just old bats that like to boss me around. He grumbled, and this time a sad smile was on her face. You should value your teachers more, Naruto. They don't last forever, one day you won't have any. Just like me. She said the last part lower than a whisper, so he didn't hear. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? He said quite loudly and she sighed. You act like you're deaf. Anyway, have fun on your mission. She said, walking past him. A tear formed in her eye, but she blinked it away. Aika threw countless kunai at the target, but each one missed entirely. She sighed and ran a hand through her blue locks, closing her eyes. The reason why the kunai wouldn't hit the targets was because her mind was so distracted. She felt as though something horrible was coming, but she knew nothing of it. What do you want, Danzo? She snapped, her eyes opening in the blink of an eye. My, you are quite sharp, he said, and she heard his shuffling footsteps coming from behind her. I hope that you aren't taking an interest in that Jinchuriki. You know what'll happen to him, he said coldly, and her head snapped in his direction. Her eyes turned a black and she lunged at him. Her eyes were crazed and bloodthirsty, and she held a kunai at his neck. He was knocked to the ground and his one eye was wide. Soon, her eyes turned back to their normal red color, and she got off him, walking out of the training room. She stopped and looked over her shoulder. Just so you know, Danzo, if you lay even one hand on him, I will hunt you down and kill you. She spat, continuing to walk away, leaving the elder on the floor. After feeling like she had walked away far enough, she slowed and placed a hand on her heart. She clenched her fist over the fabric of her shirt, and squeezed her eyes shut at the tears that came to her eyes. What did I do? When he mentioned hurting Naruto, I couldn't stand it. Everything became red and black, it was like I wasn't in control of my body anymore. She thought, and then realization hit her. Yes, you figured out, filthy child. She froze in her footsteps, and broke into a run to get out of sight. I won't let you out, you evil creature. She shouted under her breath, and she heard the chuckle. I'd like to see you try, ha 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 ha. No, I won't let you. Go back into your cage, she said a little bit louder. Pain was shooting from the seal on her rib cage, causing her to fall to the ground and cough up blood. I can feel it. I'll soon be free. You will be nothing but a memory, ha 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 ha. Aika screamed and clutched directly above the seal that was weakening slightly. She coughed up more blood, the seal feeling like it had pushed her heart into a corner. She coughed up more blood and she could hear the death siren laughing evilly in her mind. I will continue until you set me free. You will give in. No, I won't let you. I won't let you. The more time that went past only got more agonizing, the pain did. Aika. She felt slightly relieved that someone had come to help her, but then that feeling was overwhelmed by panic. No, stay away. Afraid that they would find out her dark secret that no one besides the Hokage, Danzo and the other elders knew, she tried to crawl away. She recognized the voice too, Naruto. She thought, and her heart started aching, not from the legend inside of her, but because of her feelings. She didn't want him to know what she had inside of her, because it was much worse than the nine-tailed fox within him. The pain subsided and she gasped for air, the crushing feeling within her vanishing. Her vision returned, and she saw Naruto, along with Kakashi and Sakura, holding baskets full of berries. Her ragged breathing and panting breaths indicated that she had lost a lot of energy. She slowly stood up, but stumbled, and somebody caught her. Her eyes were closing, and she struggled to keep them open, not wanting to look weak, or give any indication of something odd with her, but her attempts were in vain. Aika jolted awake as her seal reacted to something, and she jumped away, and saw a medical ninja looking at her in shock. The brunette quickly regained her composure and smiled weakly at the medic. The green-eyed girl made her way to leave, but only to be stopped by the medic. Miss, you shouldn't, from what I was told, you seem to be in a bad condition, she said, and Aika chuckled. I'm fine, nothing you can do can help me. I just need rest, she said before shoving past the doctor and started making her way out of the hospital. She heaved a heavy sigh as she noticed that it was dark, and she began walking towards her home. Memories came flooding back to her from her childhood. What is wrong with your hair? Did you dye it or something? And why is it so stringy and dry? Some of the boys who enjoyed tormenting her commented. He was only about 8 years old, and so was she. The young Aika looked away, tears in her eyes. Hey, I'm talking to you. He shouted in her ears and pulled her hair. She squeaked but let him do as he wished. If she did anything to stop him, she would be the one to be punished. She agreed with him. Her hair was odd and stringy and dry, like she'd been in a desert her entire life. She was pushed to the ground, green eyes closing as she took the beating that the other children served, longing to play amongst them. Not wanting to be viewed as a monster and a danger, she wanted to be seen as a human, a real human. She chuckled sadly at the memory, another coming back from the depths of her mind. Aika hummed happily with a craft in her hands, wanting to give it to her parents, even though she knew they would throw it in the mud right in front of her, when some of the girls in her school jumped in front of her. They were a few years older. Weren't you, really pretty before? What happened to you? The one in front asked with a hand propped up on her hip which stuck out. Aika's smile dropped and she looked at the ground. Do you want us to help with it? Before she could reply, the 2 other girls were behind her and holding her in place by her arms, and the other came towards her with a kunai in her hand. Aika's eyes widened and she squirmed around, and she laughed evilly. Don't worry, we're just going to help you with your hair, she said, mocking innocence. In a jagged motion, most of the brunette's long hair was on the ground, it then coming down to her chin. They laughed and Aika had tears in her eyes. Hey, what do you think you're doing? She heard and her head snapped up and her watery eyes widened when someone shoved the girls away. A boy with dark brown hair and wide, blue eyes stood there. He was a genin by the name of Simon. He became like an older brother to the small girl, and he wore the hidden mist headband with proud honor. But, he died. Aika had watery eyes as she remembered the next memory that resurfaced along with the previous one. Simon, Simon, Aika screamed as she saw him with blood splattered all around him with grave wounds around him. No, don't leave me, stay, please, she screamed and he smiled weakly at her. Aika, I'm sorry. You're like a little sister to me, and I want you to know that I love you, and that I'll always be with you, even once I move along, he said, his smile slowly vanishing and his eyes dulling. Simon, please, I love you too, big brother. Tears were then streaming down the girl's face and she laughed at herself. The tears continued to pour and she continued to walk, noticing that she had stopped and wiped at her eyes. Aika. She spun around and saw a blonde-haired boy who just came out of the ramen shop. She smiled. Hey, Naruto, she said, and he looked at her with concern. Are you alright? He asked and tilted her head in confusion. Yeah, why wouldn't I be? She asked and he walked over to her. Her heart started beating faster the closer that he got, and he finally spoke again. You're crying. Her brows furrowed and her hand went up to her cheeks, which were in fact damp. She hadn't realized that she was still crying, and she just chuckled and grinned. Oh, it's nothing, she said, although half of it was true. Her brother's pain did bring her pain, but it wasn't something that others had to be concerned about, and the other part. That would be a story for another time. He looked at her with all seriousness, which shocked her. It can't be nothing if you're crying. You never cry unless something is really not right, he said, and her smile dropped. Was it really so easy to see through her? She shook her head. Naruto, I'm fine, she promised, and he didn't seem to believe her. Aika, if you need to talk to somebody, you can talk to me, he said, and her heart clenched. If only I could, maybe then I wouldn't feel so lonely, she thought sadly. She smiled and waved, walking off. Maybe I'll tell you, one day, she thought. Naruto's words haunted Aika all night. You can talk to me. You can talk to me. You can talk to me. Tears streamed down her face as those 5 words repeated in her mind over and over. She honestly had no idea why she was crying. She just felt so emotional these past few days, like the wall that she built around herself in order to protect her and never let anyone know the truth was breaking. She closed her eyes, forcing the tears to stop. The more that I'm around him, the more of an urge that I feel to tell him. But, I can't burden him with this heavy secret, and he might be in danger if he knew, she thought to herself with a sigh. She turned around in her bed and looked out at the moon. It was so beautiful, and then she thought earlier wishes. If somebody were to light up my world, like the moon in the night sky, Maybe then I could be happy. Truly, happy. She spoke her thoughts aloud, not realizing it until she saw her lips moving in the window. As she remembered her already stated words, Naruto's face popped into her mind. A slight pink dusted her cheeks, but she forced it away. She closed her eyes, slightly fearful about the nightmares about to come. As she expected, she was sitting up in bed in a cold sweat near 4 o'clock in the morning. She sighed and thought about how she would look like if she had never been placed with the burden of the monstrosity that lay within her. She would have had the most beautiful golden hair, silky smooth and shiny, but those were all fantasies that she would never have again. Cursed, she was. She looked like a siren with human legs and a kind heart. Though she knew that her heart was not all that kind, she only appeared that way. She often wished that someone else had been chosen to be the host of the Siren, someone stronger. But then I never would have met Naruto. She added to her thoughts and shook her head, and getting up to get dressed and start her early training once again. The pale turquoise-haired girl jumped out her window, her ninja clothing moving around with her body. She jumped from roof to roof until she noticed Sakura pacing in the street. She jumped down in front of the girl, startling her. "Oh, Aika, it's just you," she said, a hand to her heart. The girl smiled and chuckled. "Oh well, since it's just me, I should go," she said in a teasing and overdramatic tone. Sakura shook her hands in front of her face. No, I didn't mean it like that. Aika," she exclaimed, and the latter laughed at her pink-haired best friend. Besides Naruto, Sakura was her best friend. Though she often felt envy towards the pink-haired girl since Naruto was head over heels for the other girl. I know," she replied with a kind smile, though on the inside, she was frowning. When she laughed, she was weeping. When she smiled, she was frowning. When she was excited, she was scared. Her emotions were all lies. She wanted other people to think that she was happy, when she tried to cover up her real emotions, but sometimes it slipped, like when she occasionally cried in front of Naruto. "You never cry unless something is really not right," he had said, but she was always crying. Not that he would ever know, and she'd probably be dead by the time that he found out her secret, since many people wanted her dead and others wanted her power. A tear found its way to her eye and she quickly turned around from her friend. "I'm sorry, Sakura. I have to go," she said and started running in other direction. Sakura looked at her quizzically but kept doing what she had been off to do before. Aika stopped running when she reached the forest, and she leaned on a tree, burying her face in her hands. Tears escaped her eyes and she tried to make them stop. A sob escaped her lips. "I'm such an idiot," she told herself and covered her mouth to muffle the sounds coming out of her mouth. Somebody had come up in front of her and hugged her, the girl's eyes widening until she noticed who it was. She held back sniffles and sobs, but he pulled her closer to him in a comforting way. "Aika, you don't have to deal with this alone. You can always cry on my shoulder. I can be a supporting pillar," he said, and she let it all out. All the pent-up rage and sorrow she had locked up within her heart, the very emotions she had tried so hard to conceal. All of her tears and pain let out all at once. It felt good as well as it hurt. Her emotions exploded and clashed together, making it nearly impossible for her to breathe. For once, she had a shoulder to cry on, somebody she could rely on, for real. Aika had felt strangely comfortable when Naruto was consoling her, too comfortable. She felt too at ease around him, and she knew that it would get her into some major trouble if she continued to feel that way, although she already knew that she liked him as more than a friend. She sighed to herself and ran a hand through her dry blue hair, cringing as her hand caught in a knot. She felt bad about it, but for his own safety, she had been avoiding him. Danzo would probably get the wrong idea and do something undesirable, and she didn't want that. She continued to walk and hadn't noticed a traveler from another village walking a few meters behind her. When he noticed her hair, his face turned into one of extreme rage of fear. "You!" he shouted and ran at her with extreme speed, holding a kunai in his hand. She turned around, wide-eyed when somebody caught the man's hand. You killed her. You killed my daughter, you evil monster. You killed her. Then my wife couldn't take it anymore, so she's gone too," he shouted, full of rage and killing intent. Her mouth went agape as he was dragged away by other ninjas, and the blonde turned to face her. "Hey, Aika," he was cut off by her voice. "I'm sorry," she screamed and bolted from the scene. Too many people watching, too many at risk, she thought, tears in her eyes. "They won't fall. I won't let them. She stopped running and clutched her chest, her eyes widening. No, no, you go back. Go away. Leave me alone. I won't let you out. She screamed out her rage at the creature that was dying to come out and be free. To take over her body. Just let me take over, filthy child. You won't have any pain. That wretched voice that terrorized her entire life. However, unlike the last time, she did not fall, nor would anyone help her. I can't do that. I can't afford you hurting the people I love. You've already hurt enough people. She shouted so loud, not realizing that a certain blonde had followed her and was watching the entire scene. Let me out. The voice was stronger, louder. She shook her head slowly, her body feeling numb, like she had no control. And no. But just as her body was going to get fully out of her control, she was pressure pointed and her body crumbled into a useless heap. Naruto's eyes were wide as he saw Danzo and a few Foundation Anbu members take Aika away, tying her wrists and ankles in chains. He was too stunned to do anything, but deeply regretted it after he did not see his blue-haired friend for well over a week. Worry was clawing at his stomach, in a way he had never felt before. Not when Sakura was attacked by Gaara. Not when Sasuke left to go with Orochimaru. He had never felt the same way before. To his relief, the girl finally emerged from where she was, deep red marks on her arms and shoulders, mostly her wrists. Naruto ran up to her and she flinched when he placed his hand on her shoulder. Aika, are you alright? He asked, concern dancing in his eyes. She looked away and nodded slowly, shrugging his hand off her shoulder. I'm sorry, Naruto, but you being my friend is only putting you in danger, she said, her face emotionless. His face contorted from worry to immense hurt, and she felt her heart breaking at the sight. It was because of her. He embraced her and her eyes widened. I can take care of myself, Aika. I can stand the adventure, but I can't even think of life where you're not a part of, he said, and tears swelled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. But, if only you knew who I really was, then you wouldn't say that. She whispered so gently that he didn't hear her. What was that? He asked, much more gently than usual. She smiled and pulled away. Nothing, she said, and began walking away, him trailing after her. Aika did, in fact, feel closer to Naruto than ever before, ever since he had told her that he couldn't imagine a life without her in it. Just the thought made her blush extremely. The bad part was that her feelings for him only grew, but was that really a bad thing? It would only put him in danger, but he had clearly told her that the adventure wouldn't bother him, but she knew better. Danzo could strip him of his ninja title if the Hokage allowed it, and there was a chance that she would, even though she adored Naruto like a little brother. He wanted to be Hokage himself, and she couldn't take the risk of him losing that dream. She felt happier than she had ever felt, but this time, she wasn't acting happy, she was happy. She had nearly forgotten about the incident with the man from the other village, but it had reminded her that she was still dangerous, even more so with the Siren starting to be able to take over her body. Her happy mood vaporized and left nothing but a heap of emotions. She sighed and sat down on a bench. Somebody sat down next to her and she looked up, and a shy smile coated her lips. Hi, Naruto, she mumbled, slightly embarrassed. He grinned at her. Hello, Aika, he chirped, and his voice was so soothing to her ears that her gloomy mood instantly vanished. So, she had a hard time thinking of what to tell him, and she thought about what had happened between them earlier, which made her turn red. He seemed to be having the same problem, so they just sat, their arms brushing against one another's in a content silence. Aika could wish for nothing more than to be sitting there with Naruto forever, acting like a couple watching the passing people down the street. Naruto felt the pressing urge to hold her close to him, but he knew that would be strange considering they were both friends. Why'd I fool myself by saying that I like Sakura? He thought, shaking his head. Naruto? He looked down and saw Aika's large green eyes looking at him with all their wonder. Her head tilted upwards and a little to the right, and he turned bright red. Why, yeah? He stuttered. Shoot, I stuttered, he thought, scolding himself. She giggled and he thought that it was cuter than a kitten's sneeze, assuming that was cute. What's so funny? He asked as she continued to giggle, something she had not done in a long time, and something that he had never seen her do. She was clearly happy, not a speck of gloom seen in her eyes. He felt a bloom of pride burst through him, though the reason was still unknown. It's just that, you stuttered. You never do that. She laughed, not able to stop. That's not funny. He defended and she laughed harder. You did it again. She was in such a good mood that it was rubbing off on him, but he didn't want to admit it, so he puffed his cheeks out in an attempt to hide his laughter. She looked at him devilishly, her green orbs sparking with mischief. What are you planning? He was cut off by her attacking him, and he burst out laughing. Stop it. He laughed, trying to get her to stop tickling him. The two laughed together for once in what seemed like a lifetime, and she was so gleeful that her feelings almost slipped, which resulted in her almost telling him how she felt. I never knew that you were ticklish, she said as they finally calmed down, their laughter still echoing in the air. Her eyes drooped and she struggled to stay awake, all of the used-up energy taking its toll. Her head fell onto Naruto's shoulder and he looked down at her in surprise only to see her fast asleep. He chuckled and gently removed her head from his shoulder and picked her up like a bride and started walking towards her home. The sun was already setting, and he hadn't realized how much time had passed. He jumped through the window and put her down gently on her bed, missing her warmth as soon as he put her down. He smiled down at her and jumped back out the window, closing and locking it as he did so. Aika woke up in her bed the next morning in her bed, and she looked around in confusion. She then realized what had happened, and her face turned scarlet as she remembered falling asleep on Naruto's shoulder. But then a small smile danced on her lips as she remembered of all the fun she had. Genuinely laughing and having a great time. She jumped up out of her bed and faced her reflection, the brightest smile on her face. She danced in front of the mirror, laughing at herself. She jumped in the shower soon after, still dancing. She blow-dried her hair and stood in front of the mirror again, her hair looking more hydrated. She tied her hair with a black bow and slipped on her black and dark blue ninja outfit. She jumped out of her window and realized that the sun was already up and shining brightly in the sky, signaling that it was probably around 9 o'clock, but she couldn't care less. She couldn't care less about anything except Naruto, in fact. The Konoha civilians stared at her in shock, since she had always been that gloomy person compared to Naruto who shone like the sun. She had found the moon to light up her night. She skipped around, enjoying for the first time everything she saw. She abruptly stopped skipping, the smile washing off her face like soap. A child was crying on the ground and Aika walked over to her. She kneeled down and gave a sympathetic smile. Are you alright, little one? She asked and the child looked up at her. She shook her head. I caught food my mommy AWD daddy. She cried and looked up at Aika who gave her a sweet smile. Want me to help? She asked and the child nodded. I'm Aika, what's your name? She asked as she picked up the expecting child. Hira. She sniffled and Aika continued to smile. What do your mommy and daddy look like? She asked, and for a moment, Aika felt something off about the child, but ignored it. Well, my daddy has long black hair. I think that's him, she shouted pointing to a man in the distance. Aika nearly dropped the child as she turned into crows. She looked away only to see all red. She looked around frantically, panicking. An idea came into her mind and she made the hand signs and shouted, release. She managed to disturb her chakra, but with the help of the Siren's dark entity. She managed to get out of the genjutsu and she ran back towards the village, which was quite a few miles away. Her heart was racing and her eyes were wide from shock, and by the time she managed to get to the village, she heard a voice. We will come back for you, Aika Kasumi. This is your warning, you shall not escape next time. She hadn't noticed that she had stopped running and was in the middle of Konoha, but somehow she felt as if she had run much more than she truly did. Itachi's words echoed in her mind. I had to tell the Hokage. Aika barged in through the doors of the Hokage building and into the office, the guards running after her and trying to get her to stop. Tsunade looked up at her in surprise. This must be urgent if you barged in here without permission, she said with an irritated sigh. Aika was panting and her eyes were wild. She looked back at the two men and Tsunade dismissed them. It's the Akatsuki, she started, trying to catch her breath. Tsunade's eyes widened. I was helping a little girl, who turned out to be a genjutsu by Itachi Uchiha, and he told me that next time, he would catch me, and I won't escape. She finished, wheezing. Tsunade stood up, slamming her fists on the table. Aika, I will assign 3 black ops to guard you at all times. You cannot go anywhere without them. Always try to stay in a populated area where there are other ninja, just in case. She said, and also, stay away from Naruto. Aika's heart stopped beating at those words. What? She asked in disbelief. If you two are together, it'll be easier for them to capture, and by the time we get word that they're here, you two'll probably be gone. She explained and her eyes filled with tears. I'd die before letting him get hurt when I'm there. She whispered and ran out, the 3 black ops dispatched and following her. She was trying desperately to blink away the tears, but they still remained. To her left, she saw Naruto with a questionable expression. Her eyes followed him and the tears fell. The Hokage was not right. She shouldn't have to stay away from the one that she loves because villains wanted the both of them, for different reasons, probably. But what did they want with her? She had to ask herself that question. She stopped running at the outskirts of the Leaf Village, and she noticed the Black Ops standing behind her. The tears continued to fall uncontrollably. She hated everything at that moment. The Hokage, herself, the Black Ops, everything. Could you stand further back, please? She asked, her voice cracking. They nodded and jumped back a meters. I want to die. The days turned into weeks, which turned into a month. Aika had obeyed and stayed clear of Naruto, even though her heart broke every time she had to run away. She did not know how much more she would endure. The Hokage's tactics may have been a bit harsh, but she understood the logic behind them. But she was strong, very strong, and so was Naruto. If the Akatsuki came after them while they were together, they might be evenly matched. Aika sighed as she saw the Black Ops a few meters away from her, as usual. She sat down on the bench where she had talked to Naruto the last time, and she felt the tears well up in her eyes, though she willed herself not to cry. The weaker she got, the more chances the Siren had of coming out. The less frequent attacks got to being at least twice a week, and it started worrying Danzo as well as the elders. They had tried to convince the Hokage to keep her locked up within a containment cell for tailed beasts, only to be shot down instantly. If the Siren broke free, no cage would contain her. She was much, much stronger than even the 9 tails when at full power. That is why Aika had to constantly be alert for any signs of movement or attempt from the Siren. She saw Naruto and she got up to leave, but right when she was going to make a run for it, a hand seized her wrist. She turned away and saw Naruto, looking at her with a stern yet pleading look. Her tears thickened, and she swallowed the lump in her throat. Why are you running away each time I come near? He asked and her heart started cracking. I can't be around you. She mumbled and he looked at her. Why not? He asked and she once again swallowed the lump in her throat, though it was much bigger than the one before. She put on a fierce look. Because you're a monster. That's why. She shouted and people all around her stopped moving. She saw his eyes widen and betrayal filling them. She could hear her heart shattering into thousands of tiny pieces like a mirror punched with extreme force. She turned around and ran, looking back once, tears flying out of her eyes as she saw his bangs covering his eyes, and saw a single tear fall. Once she was out of sight and turned into an alleyway, she fell on her hands and knees, looking at the ground. She screamed in rage and pain, the tears falling from her eyes in rivers. She punched the ground repeatedly until her fist became bloody and sore. It isn't fair. Kill me, my pain and the Siren, and be done with it. She clenched her fists before bringing them up to her eyes. She screamed again, and then her loud sobs echoed all around her. She curled up into a tiny ball on the ground, her feelings in turmoil, an eternal brawl. Had she done the right thing? Or had she not? Should she feel like she protected him? Or harmed him? Let me out. Your pain will vanish. I can make that happen. Aika's head snapped up and she put a hand to her heart. The Siren would erase her pain, but deliver it to someone else. The boy now hates you. What reason is there for you to live? Aika's tears streamed even more and she clutched her head. She was right, but even so, she had to live to protect all of the people. But if she were to die, it would protect them even more. She eyed a kunai from her holster and grabbed it, aiming it at her heart. She gave the Anbu Black Ops a sharp look as if saying, stay away and don't interfere. She took a deep breath and brought it down towards her heart very quickly, but just as it was going to pierce her skin, a strong hand wrapped around it and threw the kunai across the alley. A thick mist started to form and all she could see was red eyes. Her eyes widened in shock and she started running out of the alley, only for it to seem like forever. No, she screamed and started to disturb her chakra, and as soon as she did, she was thrown into a building, making a dent. She gasped as she fell to the ground and saw the approaching feet of Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. She jumped up and turned around, trying to run away, only to have something crashing down on her. She was thrown through the window of a restaurant and she could hear the terrorized screams of the customers. She slowly started getting up only to be pushed back down with so much force that the floor cracked under her. "Let her out." "Never. You'd have to kill me first," she replied, wincing as the weight on her increased. "I said let her out. And I told you that it's never going to happen." And after that, she was knocked out cold. When she opened her eyes, she was being carried by someone with blurry vision, but all she could see were a few ninja running after them, and one of them was Naruto. After that they were teleported somewhere else, and she lost consciousness again. Aika awoke in a strange cell made of bricks, metal cuffs tied around her wrists keeping her in a vertical position on the wall. The heavy metal door opened loudly and she looked up and saw a man with a mask on his face. "Will you let her out willingly or will we have to do it the hard way?" he said gravely, and she gulped but remained still, trying her best not to look frightened. The man sighed. "You brought this upon yourself. We will get the siren out either way," he said gravely. Her agonized screams were all that was heard throughout the peaceful landscape. Naruto ran on top of the buildings in Konoha, faster than he'd ever run before. His heart was hammering in his chest, his eyes were wide and frantic, and he saw the last images of Aika that he'd seen, being carried away by the Akatsuki, helpless and frightened. This only caused him to run faster, and he felt his eyes sting as fresh tears formed. He blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help her, it wouldn't bring her back home. The only thing that would be him. He was the only one capable of completing that. He cared for her more than anyone else, and though he may still be oblivious to his true feelings towards the blue-haired girl, he was not known for giving up on his friends. He would bring her back no matter the cost. He slammed the door to the Hokage office opened, and Tsunade looked up at him with slight alarm in her eyes. "Naruto, what are you doing here?" she asked, going back to her paperwork. "It's Aika. She was captured by the Akatsuki," he said, panting a little bit. The blonde-haired woman's eyes widened. "What? I assigned 3 of my strongest Anbu to her. She's also a strong shinobi," she explained, and Naruto glared. "I saw her. She tried to kill herself to protect us all, but she also seemed depressed, like her only reason to live had been taken away." He growled out and Tsunade's eyes widened and guilt danced across them. "What aren't you telling me?" Naruto shouted, and the older woman closed her eyes and sighed. "I ordered her to stay away from you. I believed that it would keep you safe if the Akatsuki came for her," she replied calmly. "You knew? And you told her to stay away from me?" he demanded, and Tsunade sighed again. "Yes, I knew. That's why I assigned Anbu to her. She knew as well, and she stayed away from you as I instructed. But I believe that she was doing it mostly to protect you. They couldn't capture the 9 tails as well as the siren at the same time. The affect would have been cataclysmic," she explained. "I'm going after her," Naruto said seriously, and Tsunade turned around. "No, it's too dangerous. I'm only trying to keep you safe," she exclaimed, slamming her fist on the desk. Naruto turned around, started walking out the door. The door was open and he turned his head over his shoulder. "All your attempts to protect me have failed," he replied coldly before slamming the door. The Hokage fell into her chair, hiding her eyes with her hands. He's right. Maybe all of this could have been avoided if I hadn't made her stay away from him, she thought glumly, calling for a special team of ninja. Sakura, Hinata, Shino, Kiba, Sai as well as Rock Lee stood before the Hokage, and she had a serious look in her eyes. Naruto has left the village. He's attempting to go after Aika, alone and without a plan. This is the Akatsuki we're dealing with. If he goes to them, it'll make their job so much easier. You're assigned to bring Naruto back, injure him if you must, but bring him back," Tsunade said sternly, and they all nodded, but Sakura was as white as a sheet. Aika and Naruto were her friends. Could she really abandon them like that? Could she really hurt Naruto and leave Aika for dead? They were all dismissed and jumped out of the village, hoping that Naruto wouldn't be too far ahead of them. Naruto rushed through the trees, hoping to catch up with the 2 Akatsuki members and Aika, but without a hint of tracking abilities, it became quite difficult. In the distance, he saw them, and he increased his speed. When they were within earshot, he yelled, "Give Aika back!" They turned around, but the fish-like man named Kisame grinned evilly at him, showing off his shark-like teeth, while Itachi continued on, Aika tucked under his arm. "Get out of the way." he shouted, hitting Kisame with a few Rasengans. He flew back into a tree, but Naruto didn't have the time to notice that Kisame had disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto jumped on Itachi, and both Ika and the Uchiha disappeared in another puff of smoke. Confused, he stopped on the branch of a tree, and 6 ninjas stood before him, all looking ready to fight. "What are you doing?" he exclaimed, and Shino replied. "We're here to bring you back." Naruto's eyes widened. "No way, I'm not going," he shouted, and Kiba growled. "You don't have a choice, Naruto. It's either come now or become a rogue ninja. Think about it, Naruto. You can't become Hokage if you're a rogue ninja." Rock Lee pipped up. "I couldn't care less about that now. The only thing that matters is to bring Ika back home. I'll fight you if I have to, I won't lose. I won't give up," he shouted, and Hinata's eyes widened, and she closed them, preparing to jump at him. Her eyes opened and she launched off the branch and landed beside the blonde. "Hinata, what are you doing?" Kiba asked, and she looked at the ground. "I'm helping Naruto. He really cares about Ika, and he deserves to be happy." Hinata. Sakura trailed off, and everyone looked just as dumbstruck as she did, including Naruto. Sakura's fist turned green and she prepared an attack. Naruto's eyes widened, and just when she would have attacked them, she turned around and hit the branch that Shino, Sai, Kiba and Rock Lee were standing on. "Go!" she shouted as she fell with them. Naruto nodded and started jumping, Hinata following. "Thank you, Sakura," he thought, more determined than ever before. Ika would come back, for all their sakes. It seemed like hours had passed before Naruto and Hinata came across a clearing. It was neat, almost too neat. Flowers sprouted from the ground, and across the meadow was a little eerie cabin, no sign of life inside of it. It was getting dark and there should be lights on. Naruto looked at Hinata and they both nodded. Running across the clearing and stopping in front of the cabin door, making sure not to be seen through windows. Naruto took a deep breath and held it, slowly pushing the door open. It creaked a little and the two stepped inside, and found dust covering almost every inch of it. Naruto's head snapped up when he heard a scream, but he was the only one who heard it. "How do you think that we got here, without a ninja hound?" he asked quickly, and she looked at him quizzically, her eyes widened slightly. "We just went in a direction and followed our instincts. Here," she said softly. He jumped on her, trying to push her out of the cabin. "It's a trap, that darn Akatsuki," he shouted, and just as they jumped out of the cabin it exploded and came crashing down. Debris flying all over the place. Naruto coughed and waved his hand, trying to get the smoke out of his face. Hinata came out from behind him, but before she could reach him, he was pulled into the ground, not a single trace of him left. "Naruto?" Hinata shouted just as the other members that Sakura had diverted came rushing into the skein. Naruto slowly got up and found himself in an empty cave, standing on gravel. "Hello?" he called, looking around at his environment. "Where am I?" he mumbled and started walking further into the cave, the only sound being his feet hitting the gravel, echoing throughout the cave. "Hello?" he said again, though much louder. "Naruto." He heard a whisper and he wiped around, but saw nothing. His brows furrowed in confusion. "Naruto." He heard it again, and he turned towards the darkest part of the cave, where a little girl with silky long blonde hair and large red eyes, wearing a white nightgown covered in blood, a seal glowing from the center of her chest, where a large scar that seemed blue lay. The veins all around it were a black color, and her eyes were half open, like she was half asleep, her red eyes glazed over. "Don't stare, like all of them used to," she whispered, and he looked up at her face. She seemed so familiar, but he couldn't place a finger on it. "I will show you my past, and all of my feelings. From the past, and the present," she said softly, and then she flew at him, and entered his body, and with one last yell, everything went black. "Mommy?" the blonde girl asked, standing in the door frame of a bedroom, wearing a white nightgown and rubbing her red eyes. A woman with brown hair and green eyes looked down at the girl with something like regret, fear, pain, and sorrow filling her green orbs. She smiled sadly down at the girl. "We had to go to the doctors, honey," she said, her voice trembling. "Why?" the blonde girl asked, and the woman took a deep breath. "You're going to save the village, Ika. You'll be a hero," she said, and the girl blinked warily. "Hero? Me?" she asked in a high-pitched voice. "Yes, honey," the woman said softly, her voice smooth and comforting. Naruto watched the scene before him, and his eyes widened. That little girl was Aika? The one who had just suddenly appeared in the village. But why didn't she have blue hair? So many questions bustled in his mind, and he snapped out of his thoughts as he paid attention to what was going on in front of him. It might prove helpful to him later on in rescuing Aika. People might be afraid of you, because then you'll be different from the other children and people in the village. But don't hurt them, ever, okay? She said, and Aika nodded. The woman held her hand out and Naruto felt a lump form in his throat. People were afraid of those who were different. He knew how that was all too well. Aika took her mother's hand and was led out of the house and into the dark streets, a mist hanging in the air. Naruto noticed that the woman wore a hidden mist headband on her forehead and that the air was covered in mist. Aika was led down towards a beach where the weather raged. They stopped at a certain part of the beach, directly at the shoreline. They were then sucked into the earth and Naruto jumped in after them, curious but also frightened of what he might find. There lay a room with a metal table filled with ekipmon, masked ninja buzzing around. "Mommy?" He heard a shrill voice squeak and he diverted his eyes to the metal table where Aika was strapped to tightly, her dress cut. Soon a black cloud of smoke was hovering above her, and she started crying. "Mommy!" She shouted and started sobbing, and then she started screaming as the rods the ninja held cackled with something looking like green electricity pushing the black cloud into a cut that he only noticed then in the center of her chest, the skin being pulled apart. It looked painful, and he felt like he was going to be sick. "No, please, no, it hurts, it hurts," she screamed, and her cries were all that were heard. Naruto remained frozen on the spot, eyes wide in horror. "No, you cannot place me into that filthy child. You scum." He looked around noticing that no one had spoken. He looked over at Aika's mother who just looked at the ground, her eyes dull. How could she sit back and do nothing while her child was suffering? It didn't make any sense to him. Not at all. After a while, Naruto jumped on one of the men holding a rod. "Stop it, you're hurting her," he shouted only to go right through the man. He stood up and looked around, and his hand passed right through a table. His brows furrowed and he noticed Aika's nightgown starting to be tinged with blood. His heart hammered in his chest and it ached with each passing moment. Soon the smoke was gone and the wound sewn up, a seal placed on it, and Aika was fast asleep, her eyes still shedding tears and her face red from the countless tears that ran down her cheeks, her hair bleached a dark blue. The scene changed quickly and Naruto found him in front of the house that Aika had been in moments before. He saw Aika, though she looked a few years older, her hair down to her hips. She was backing away from her mother and father who stood at the door, her mother shaking in fear and her father holding her protectively and glaring down at the still small child. "Get out of here, demon!" He shouted and threw something at her, and she blocked it with her arms, and he could see the tears in her eyes. "Get out!" he shouted and she ran away, not looking back. Then another scene happened where she was being bullied by girls who cut her hair and some guy with brown hair and blue eyes intercepted. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" he had said and scared of the other girls. "Simon, Simon!" Aika screamed as she saw him with blood splattered all around him with grave wounds around him. "No, don't leave me, stay, stay, please," she screamed and he smiled weakly at her. "Aika, I'm sorry. You're like a little sister to me, and I want you to know that I love you, and that I'll always be with you, even once I move along," he said, his smile slowly vanishing and his eyes dulling. "Simon, please, I love you too, big brother." Naruto had to hold back tears as he saw Aika crying on the body of Simon, the one who took her in as a little sister. He never knew that Aika had such a hard past, yet she was still able to smile like she did. It hurt him to see her like that, how horrible she had it. It was worse than his childhood. Finally the scene turned white, and he saw Aika, chained to a stone wall, hanging from her arms, head hung low and her eyes barely open, wounds all over her body. She closed her eyes as a tear fell, and he could hear her thoughts. Naruto. After that it all went dark. He heard a weird buzzing sound as he slowly awoke from his slumber, which he didn't know had crept upon him. His eyes shot open and he sat upright quite quickly, looking around. He saw Sakura and Hinata beside him, and the others standing around. Then he remembered what he had seen, and he quickly ran away and threw up. He wiped his mouth and took deep breaths, before the group got to where he was. "Naruto, what happened while you were down there?" Shikamaru asked and Naruto shook, tears coming to his eyes. "It was horrible. he said, trying to hide his tears, but failing. What was it? Choji asked, munching on chips. Naruto took a deep breath. Aika's past. Everything that's happened to her. Things she hides with a smile. Scars that never healed. Scars that I could have healed. But I was so stupid. I couldn't see that behind her smile, there was a storm raging, a strange solitude, and darkness. So much darkness. He blinked, trying to get the tears to leave, but one managed to roll down his cheek. They all wanted to know exactly what those memories were, but didn't dare say it, in fear of Naruto breaking down or raging at them. And it seemed like something personal to Aika. No one knew why it affected him so much except Sakura. She had been the one to make him realize. Naruto, you love her, don't you? Sakura asked, stepping out from the shadows and behind Naruto, who was looking at the moon on a park bench. Yeah, I mean, she's a great friend. Sakura looked at him with sad eyes. She shook her head. No, I don't mean as a friend. I mean as something more. She said, and he looked at her in shock, but the expression soon melted away and his eyes softened. I guess. She's always been there for me, and I know that I'll always be there for her, which is why I'm going to find her and bring her home. Sakura sighed. You don't understand, Naruto. I mean as a lover, a girlfriend, a wife. She said, and he laughed. I can't realize things until I lose something, huh? He said, and his chuckle died down as he looked at the town below them. I didn't realize that Sasuke was one of the most important people in my life until he left, and now Aika. I thought she was just a friend. I had always viewed her as a friend. I was too afraid that she'd reject me, so I ignored all other feelings for her, as if they were never there. He said, and Sakura stared at him. He turned to face her. Yeah, I do love her. It pained her to see such a close friend of hers in so much pain, but she knew that nothing could ease that pain unless Aika came back. If he could find her, but time was slowly running out, they all knew. Aika was strong, but even the strongest of people eventually cave in. If they didn't get to her before that, then none of their efforts would matter anymore. Why don't you give up? It'll spare you the pain. A dark voice spoke and Aika's head hung, her energy fading. The man sighed. You're only bringing this upon yourself. And then unimaginable pain hit her. A few days later, it seemed almost impossible to find Aika, and even though the others agreed to help find her after asking the permission from Tsunade, they were all slowly losing hope as time stretched by, but Naruto was determined to find her, with or without their help. They were searching through a forest and finally Naruto spotted a cave that was being hidden by some sort of jutsu, but that jutsu was coming undone. Guys! He shouted and the others rushed to his side, and he pointed at the flickering trees and bushes. Do you think? Shikamaru started and they nodded and slowly headed towards the entrance to the cave. Once inside, they noticed that it was dimly lit by candles, and that it was pretty much a vast area. An ear-piercing scream was heard and they all ran in the direction of the sound, Naruto being the one running far in front of everyone else. Turning around several corners, he arrived at a door, and he broke through it, and saw Aika chained to a wall, a man with a mask standing in front of her. Aika! He shouted in fear and relief to see her. Her head snapped up and her eyes widened. No, Naruto! Ru-arg! She shouted, her voice being cut off by a roar. He noticed the seal on her chest glowing, and her eyes were going from red to black, black to red, and she broke through the chains and fell to the ground, moving as she continued to scream and roar, her hair going from blue to black, her body shifting, her legs starting to melt into the other and turning black and growing a fin, her body growing twice her previous size, her teeth getting sharper, her wounds healing and her fingernails growing a few inches longer, her hair going all the way to her waist. She curled up and then stretched, rolling around in pain. Run! She shouted, though her voice was different, it was darker and graver, a strange echo to it, but he was frozen on the spot, his eyes wide. The man laughed evilly. I told you I would get her out, eventually. He saw Aika's eyes continue from red to black, as if she were fighting the transformation. Please, Naruto, I don't want to hurt you. She shouted, and she sent him flying through walls before her eyes went black and didn't revert to red once again. To be continued in The Siren of Death. Naruto awoke in a hospital bed, but once he looked around, he noticed that the walls were crumbling, the windows shattered and things were on the ground. He stood up slowly and looked around him. He ran at one of the windows and saw explosions and the sound of fighting in the distance. His eyes widened when he remembered what had last happened to him, and what happened to Aika. He jumped through the window and landed on a roof, running along the rooftops. He dodged debris flying towards him, and when he finally got there, he froze. Bodies littered the ground, blood stenched the air, trees were toppled over, and right in the middle of it all was Aika, or the Siren. Ninja attacking her but being deflected with a flick of her wrist. He ran up to the Hokage, who was in battle gear. "What's going on, Granny?" he shouted, and she looked at him in shock. "You weren't supposed to wake up until the battle was over," she said glumly. "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. "I placed a sleeping jutsu on you so you wouldn't get involved. It was to keep you safe," she said, and he glared. "Your attempts to keep me safe have all failed in the past. If they did, the effect would be catastrophic," he shouted, and she looked away. "I know, but in order to save the world, the Siren must die. I didn't want you to have to see her die." "You're seriously going to let her die?" Naruto asked in shock. "It's for the best, Naruto. One life for the world. I'm not proud of doing that, but I must," she said, and looked at Naruto. "Aika is suffering in there, Naruto. All the other ninja aren't doing very good in defeating her, it's all up to you. I think you're the only one capable of saving us all." Naruto was frozen and then looked over at the Siren, who laughed evilly as she ate someone. He gave a look of disgust. She ate someone. He shivered but looked at her again, seeing that Aika was never coming back. He nodded, and Tsunade gave a relieved sigh, and he ran at Aika, hoping that he wouldn't have to kill her. But he knew he had to, if everyone else were to survive. He took out a kunai and jumped, nearly grazing her hand before he was pushed away by a strong gust of wind. His eyebrows furrowed, and he ran at her again, though with much more force. All he could see was Aika, crying at the destruction that she thought she had caused, but she hadn't. It wasn't her fault. She held on as long as she could, and now it was up to Naruto to finish the rest. "This is getting out of hand. We better retreat for now." The masked man, though, sighing and making the Siren disappear, and soon he followed. Naruto stood in shock at the destruction around him, all caused by Aika. The Aika he knew would never do that. But once again he had to make himself see that it wasn't Aika anymore. She was gone, and he had been too late to save her from that fate. He shook his head. He couldn't blame himself. Or maybe, it was all the motivation he needed to stop the Siren. It was his fault that it was out, so it was his responsibility to defeat it. But this time, he wouldn't go on a wild goose chase trying to find it, he would let it come to him. "We must send a notification to all ninja villages. This is no longer a problem of the Leaf Village. This has become an international affair." Tsunade, still bruised from the recent fight, barked out orders, though her voice quivered. After all, how could the leader of a village stay calm after finding herself in the predicament that another one of her villagers turned evil or got kidnapped by the Akatsuki? Or both? Sakura clenched her fist, feeling a growing feeling of despair. Why did the Akatsuki always take away the people that she cared about? Naruto, too. She knew that it was as hard, if not harder, for him as it was for her. She would bring down the Siren, if not for the village, for her friends. The friends that were still with her, and the ones that were still with her, and the ones that she lost in the fight. "Lady Tsunade, the other cage are on live screen," someone shouted, and Tsunade stormed over. "Another problem, Tsunade?" the Raikage shouted, his voice still rough. "Why is it that it's always the Leaf Village asking for help?" The Mizukage chuckled humorlessly. The powers of something devastating has once again been unleashed by the Akatsuki. The former power of the hidden mist, handed over to us. Tsunade started, and the Mizukage's eyes widened. "You don't mean?" she started, and the blonde Hokage nodded in affirmation. She sighed. "I see. I have no choice but to help, I presume." She spoke strongly. "I will help as well." Gaara, the cage nodded as well. "I'm getting too old for this." The Tsuchikage grumbled, rubbing his back. They all turned to the Raikage's screen. "Well, Raikage, I'll send in a few ninja, but only a few. Then it's decided. We will find the Siren and bring her down." The tracking room bustled with activity. There seems to be an overflowing aura of darkness in the north of the intersection between all 5 villages. "Don't tell me they're waiting for us to come to them?" Tsunade muttered, eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "Just what are they planning?" she continued, turning around and glancing at all the gathered ninja. "We will divide ourselves in 2 lines. The first, any ninja willing to fight except those placed in the second line. In the second line, we will have our elite, ready at hand in case things go south. she ordered, a fierce determination in her eyes. The rallying ninja nodded, letting out a cheer before going to their respective cage in order to be placed in a certain line. Sakura, Naruto, Kakashi and a few other very powerful Jonin and Anbu were placed in the second line. Here we go. With a battle cry, they all started running towards the designated area. Night had fallen, and the group of shinobi had decided to sleep for the night, some sensory and strong ninja guarding the perimeter of the makeshift camp. Naruto sat facing the flickering fire, unable to sleep. Something shifted to his right, and when he looked, he saw Sakura sitting there with a sympathetic and sad look in her eyes. It's hard to think that only a year ago she was walking around the village with us. She whispered and he nodded, staring at the star-filled sky with a longing look in his blue orbs. He sighed and turned his gaze to his pink-haired teammate. Am I weak, Sakura? I couldn't stop Sasuke from leaving, and I couldn't save Ika from the Akatsuki. How will I become Hokage if I can't even save two people dear to me? Her eyes widened at his question. Her face softened. No, Naruto, you aren't weak. If anything, each time an obstacle shows itself to you, you become stronger after it, meaning nothing will ever bring you down for forever. As much as it hurts to lose a friend, it is even more important that you take that loss in stride, because they will always be with you, they never truly leave, all that matters, she pointed to the left side of her chest, is what this decides to do. Sometimes it takes longer to move on, but the people around you will help you get right back on your feet if you fall. Tears came to her emerald eyes and she sniffed and wiped them away. I learned that myself, and look where I am now. I know that he never really left me, that he's still here, even though he claims to go on another path. She wiped yet another one and looked into the darkness behind the trees. She then stood up, brushing off her skirt. I should head back to the girls. I said I wouldn't be gone long. And so she walked into the very darkness she'd been looking at. Naruto leaned his head back against the tree and sighed, closing his eyes. I won't let your death go unresolved, you will not have died for nothing. A few days later, they arrived where the large signatures were, and they found what they were looking for. The siren was howling with laughter and pleasure at the countless lifeless bodies soaked in their own blood surrounding her. Oh, the souls, how I've longed not to be restrained by the sea. She kept on shrieking with laughter, and the sight made Naruto sick. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, trying to keep calm. He was on the second line, he couldn't just barge in there. It was hard to wait for Tsunade's signal for the second line to go when they could hear the screams and shrieks of agony the first line was making. Finally, a loud thundering burst of chakra erupted in the sky, and they all charged. We cannot lose. We must win. They all thought of the same thing, knowing that the future of the world lay in the balance. Naruto immediately called out Kurama, with Sakura, Kakashi and other second and first liners as backup. He started to hold the siren in place, struggling to do so as the rest of the second and first liners, including Sakura and Kakashi, started to attack, trying to make her fall to the ground so she wouldn't tower over them so much and in which she'd be in an easier position to attack. She laughed and, with one sweep of her arm, made several fly away and crash into the debris of the small town. You will never defeat me. Her ominous cackling sent shivers down Naruto's spine. She is not Ika. Ika is gone, and you must make sure she can rest in peace. He continued to tell himself this, and along with Kurama, they started fighting. Throwing bombs, Risengans and other jutsu that he'd learned, though the size of them were a tailed beast's grandness. His eyes widened when he saw what lay in the siren's heart, calling him over and begging him to finish it. Naruto exited Kurama and went towards the siren's heart, using a chakra-encrusted blade, and managed to tear his way into her flesh, and used a few jutsu to make his way through the skin. She had no blood, it was water, salty and black. The black heart looked like a vessel of some sort, and he tore through it to see the face of the one he'd missed. She hesitantly looked up and pointed towards the center of the heart. Her hand then fell to her side as she took labored breaths. Naruto nodded and hit it with a large Rasengan, blowing it to pieces. The siren shrieked and started moving, sending him flying out of her body, but it was too late. She'd die, he'd vanquished her, and the siren would be no more. Kurama caught Naruto in time, landing him safely on the ground. Naruto's eyes grew wide and frantic as he remembered that Ika had been in the siren as well. With a screech, the cursed malevolent creature disappeared into flakes of black tar like raindrops, and Naruto scanned the sky, seeing a figure appearing from the droplets, falling very quickly to the ground. Before he could react, the body hit the ground and created a crater. Aika! He exclaimed and ran towards the crater, jumping in. Aika lay, her breaths hard and uneven. Her hair was blonde, and perfectly silky and beautiful. He knelt beside her and she looked up, smiling. Naruto! She whispered, her voice hoarse. Her eyes were dull and nearly lifeless, and no matter how much he tried to deny it, he knew she would die. Sakura! He shouted and she slowly lifted her hand and placed it on his cheek. No, Naruto. Don't hurt yourself like that. I'm not scared. Because you are strong, and this'll make you stronger. At least my life won't have been completely worthless. She coughed, blood splattering onto her face and ground. Sakura! He screamed, not knowing what was taking the pink-haired girl too long. Naruto! I want you to know something. Something I've been keeping secret because I was too scared and I was never able to face them. I love you, Naruto. But I know that I wasn't destined to be with you. You should look around you, and you'll see who is. She's there, you just haven't seen it yet, but one day, you will. Thank you, and goodbye, Naruto. Her voice faded near the end and her eyes were blank, closing, and she wore a smile that slowly began to fade as well. Aika? Aika? No! He yelled, tears forming in his eyes and falling onto the ground, one landing on her cheek and rolling down it, as if she was crying as well. Sakura hurriedly jumped into the crater, eyes widening at the sight before her. Aika was gone, for good, and nothing they did would change that. Eventually Naruto grew stronger from her death, but he never forgot her, even after he was married to the girl Aika had spoken of, and had 2 little children. Nothing could erase the pain, but he had to move on, and so he did. A few days later, they arrived where the large signatures were, and they found what they were looking for. The Siren was howling with laughter and pleasure at the countless lifeless bodies soaked in their own blood surrounding her. Oh, the souls! How I've longed not to be restrained by the sea. She kept on shrieking with laughter, and the sight made Naruto sick. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, trying to keep calm. He was on the second line, he couldn't just barge in there. It was hard to wait for Tsunade's signal for the second line to go when they could hear the screams and shrieks of agony the first line was making. Finally, a loud thundering burst of chakra erupted in the sky, and they all charged. We cannot lose. We must win. They all thought of the same thing, knowing that the future of the world lay in the balance. Naruto immediately called out Kurama, with Sakura, Kakashi and other second and first liners as backup. He started to hold the Siren in place, struggling to do so as the rest of the second and first liners, including Sakura and Kakashi, started to attack, trying to make her fall to the ground so she wouldn't tower over them so much and in which she'd be in an easier position to attack. She laughed and, with one sweep of her arm, made several fly away and crash into the debris of the small town. You will never defeat me. Her ominous cackling sent shivers down Naruto's spine. She is not Aika. Aika is gone, and you must make sure she can rest in peace. He continued to tell himself this, and along with Kurama, they started fighting. Throwing bombs, Risengans and other jutsu that he'd learned, though the size of them were a tailed beast's grandness. His eyes widened when he saw what lay in the Siren's heart, calling him over and begging him to finish it. Naruto exited Kurama and went towards the Siren's heart, using a chakra-encrusted blade, and managed to tear his way into her flesh, and used a few jutsu to make his way through the skin. She had no blood, it was water, salty and black. The black heart looked like a vessel of some sort, and he tore through it to see the face of the one he'd missed. She hesitantly looked up and pointed towards the center of the heart. Her hand then fell to her side as she took labored breaths. Naruto nodded and hit it with a large Rasengan, blowing it to pieces. The Siren shrieked and started moving, sending him flying out of her body, but it was too late. She'd die, he'd vanquished her, and the Siren would be no more. Kurama caught Naruto in time, landing him safely on the ground. Naruto's eyes grew wide and frantic as he remembered that Aika had been in the Siren as well. With a screech, the cursed malevolent creature disappeared into flakes of black tar like raindrops, and Naruto scanned the sky, seeing a figure appearing from the droplets, falling very quickly to the ground. Before he could react, the body hit the ground and created a crater. Aika! He exclaimed and ran towards the crater, jumping in. Aika lay, her breaths hard and uneven. Her hair was blonde and perfectly silky and beautiful. He knelt beside her and she looked up, smiling. Naruto, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Her eyes were dull and nearly lifeless, and no matter how much he tried to deny it, he knew she would die. Sakura, he shouted, and she slowly lifted her hand and placed it on his cheek. No, Naruto, don't hurt yourself like that. I'm not scared, because you are strong, and this'll make you stronger. At least my life won't have been completely worthless. She coughed, blood splattering onto her face and ground. Sakura, he screamed, not knowing what was taking the pink-haired girl too long. Naruto, I want you to know something. Something I've been keeping secret because I was too scared and I was never able to face them. I love you, Naruto. But I know that I wasn't destined to be with you. You should look around you, and you'll see who is. She's there, you just haven't seen it yet, but one day, you will. Thank you, and goodbye, Naruto. Her voice faded near the end and her eyes were blank, closing, and she wore a smile that slowly began to fade as well. Aika? Aika, no, he yelled, tears forming in his eyes and falling onto the ground, one landing on her cheek and rolling down it, as if she was crying as well. Sakura hurriedly jumped into the crater, eyes widening at the sight before her. Aika was gone, for good, and nothing they did would change that. Eventually Naruto grew stronger from her death, but he never forgot her, even after he was married to the girl Aika had spoken of, and had 2 little children. Nothing could erase the pain, but he had to move on, and so he did.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.